Hello, there we go. We're live. What's up, guys? Back with Jess as we continue our ongoing series of live commentaries with animated films. We're going back to Disney on this one, which might seem a little soon because it wasn't too long ago we had done Robin Hood. But once again, I thought it was worth doing because it's definitely, again, sort of a lesser known of the Disney animated canon. You know, we talked a lot about how there were sort of eras for Disney, and of course, everybody talked about how starting in the 70s and going through almost like the first half of the 80s, it was sort of a dark age for Disney. Blah blah blah. The animation was as good. They had the exodus of key animators, including Don Bluth, who had set up his own studio. We go on. I'm not going to repeat that. We talk about that a lot in the other ones and the Don Bluth ones too. But also, I always kind of think like the quality of film is still very good there. I feel like more like the real dark age is kind of right after the Renaissance, which is like end of the 90s, start of 2000s. It's also a weird time of transition just in the medium in general because you're seeing the emergence now of the full computer animation, the 3D CGI type stuff, a la Pixar, Toy Story, and all that. And that's really starting to emerge. And so, like, it's also like when I kind of stopped going to see the Disney movies in the theater. And I really regret not seeing this in theater because this movie was clearly, if you watch it, it was made for the theater, for the big screen. It's an adventure film, lots of heavy on the spectacle. It was deliberately made in the sort of for the widescreen format. What's that called? Panagraph or anamorphic. Anamorphic widescreen, which was not the traditional way of doing Disney movies or any of the animated movies, but they wanted to evoke sort of an old school feel, like kind of the Indiana Jones films had done, getting in that sort of cult or pulp. Yeah, I guess I want to say like pulp adventure type style. So this movie kind of fell through the cracks for me at the time. It would have been released in June of 2001. I guess I was aware of it, sure, but I did not think of it as a priority. Did not go see it. And I mean, it had been a couple years. Trying to think if I think I did see Tarzan, which might have been 99, and that was maybe the last straw for me. Not that I again thought it was terrible, but I did not like Tarzan very much.
I liked it okay, but I think I'm with you around the same time, maybe even a little sooner, that I kind of gave up on getting excited about the Disney animated features towards the end of the 90s.
Right. And as that goes, it's another thing. Was like Pocahontas was a big letdown for me, but it's one like I reevaluated as an adult and like a lot more now.
Me
But at the
too.
time, it was just like, just all huge movies. As the Disney Renaissance kicks off, Little Mermaid. Then the sort of outlier is the weird sequel, The Rescuers Down Under, which some people don't even really count. Then, of course, Beauty and the Beast in 91, Aladdin 92, and then you jump to 94 with The Lion King, which is just probably their biggest success and best example. And then you follow up Lion King with Pocahontas, which I felt was a big letdown at the time. And then 96, you have Hunchback of Notre Dame, which I'm not sure how it did, but I really personally liked then, and I really like a lot now. And most of the people involved in that are responsible for this movie. This movie went into production basically as soon as that group had wrapped on that and wanted to go to their next project. And specifically, they wanted to not do a musical. They wanted to move away from sort of what had been popular with a lot of these song things. They wanted to do a straightforward adventure film, again, based on a lot of that sort of classic adventure and pulpy stuff. They were definitely inspired by Jules Verne, particularly The Journey to the Center of the Earth, which has a brief foray into Atlantis, but they want to go more into Atlantis. So that was really the thinking behind this movie. It was like a lot of the animated movies, it was co-directed. It was Kerry Truesdale and Kirk Wise, who I believe were the same directors for, I have to check for sure, but I think they're the same directors for Hunchback. So it was much of that same crew coming together after production had finished. So this had been, it had been in the development stage for a few years. Now, one of the reasons this movie has been reevaluated and reappraised and gotten sort of a cult following is because of the involvement of comic book artist and creator Mike Mignola, who was a production designer on this movie. And if you're familiar with his work and his style, particularly Hellboy, which he's best known for, here's some Hellboy people. There's what is this? The Chain Coffin, and there's a third one. I hate that. I never took that sticker off. So I must have gotten this around 2007 or so because it has the sticker for the Hellboy Golden Army. But if you're familiar with his art style, very shadowy, heavy inky blacks, people melting to the background, and character designs are kind of really angular, I'd say. Anyway, you're going to see that. And the other thing he was good at, because it's the kind of thing this movie touches on, is of course Hellboy. A lot of his adventures are based on legends and folklore and things like that. So there's a lot of stuff like ancient ruins, lost civilizations, old weird technology, and of course all that factors into this vision of Atlantis. So that's another reason why people would have come back to it, including myself, because in 2001 I was a comic book fan, but I hadn't become the serious comic book fan I've become yet. All I knew then at the time was Hellboy was a comic that existed, but I didn't read it. It was about 2 or 3 years later that I started reading, maybe around 2004. And Mike Mignola was a name that did not register at all. You know, I didn't know about his history or anything like that. He'd worked with DC and a little bit with Marvel too before going to Dark Horse and being one of their breakout stars with Hellboy, which continues to be a big franchise to this day. But anyway, so that's another thing that makes the movie really appealing to someone like me. It has a really great, unique look, very heavily influenced and based on his own artistic style, of which I'm definitely a fan. And this is the type of thing, again, an ancient lost civilization, you know, that's his wheelhouse, and it looks really great. And one of the things I noticed in reading about this was, and I'm not too sure about other depictions of Atlantis in film. Obviously, there are some. They really wanted to get away from the more generic style, which was usually just kind of like classical Greece, you know, but underwater. Was kind of what it was, you know. Picture like ancient Greece, and Greek columns and temples, but all that underwater is more or less how they go. So won't get too much into detail here, but they took inspiration from a ton of different cultures, Mayan and Southeast Asian, yeah, all over the place, because they wanted to show something very different. But you're always going to associate with Greece because the legend, the earliest mention of the legend, of course, is by Plato. Plato would have lived in about the 4th century BCE. So he kind of, I think he straddled the 4th and 3rd centuries, if I'm remembering right, Plato. Anyway, I'm pretty sure it's been a while since I've seen the movie, but I think it opens with his quote, which is something like, in a single day and night of misfortune, the island of Atlantis sank beneath the waves of the sea, or disappeared beneath the waves of the sea. I think that's the opening quote here. So he's referring something. I mean, he's already the ancient world for us, but he's trying to refer back to something that would have been even a long time ago for someone living in his time period. So there's, we won't have to get into it, but obviously there's various theories and versions of like, wow, you know, where it came from, what it might be based on, and we don't have to get into that as much as I could blather on, because I like history so much, and especially like when history intersects with myth and legend. But we will get rolling here, get the movie going. So obviously, if you have Disney Plus, this being a Disney movie, is on there. We've got it queued up about 5 seconds in as a very cool sort of watery version of the Walt Disney Pictures logo emerges. And I guess we'll go from there. How I always do is I count down 3, 2, 1. It's not on 1, it's after 1. Then we hit play and we go.
Okay. Before you count down, I do want to bring up a couple quick things.
Yes.
I don't know if you noticed, but this month will mark 1 year since I joined you in doing these animation commentaries. So
it was last
December. I wanted to note that. I think I'm actually wearing this same Jay the Stingray shirt, but it's like it's the water theme. I thought, okay, we'll go with the lens.
I'm glad you caught that. Usually I'm good at noticing and remembering those things.
I figured you would.
This slipped my mind, so that's excellent. I'm glad.
So, yeah, we start our now second.
It's been a fun year. I know it's been a bit sporadic, and we, you know, in a perfect world, we'd be able to do a bit more, and we'll see how we can do that going forward. But it's been a good time.
I look forward to
hi there, Jamie. By the way, saw your commentary, Jamie. Thanks for joining us. But
and I also got to mention, since it is December and we kind of started this, and well, you really started it with the Don Bluth films.
Yeah.
If you're out there, it's a short. It's on Disney Plus as well, called The Small One. It's a Disney short that Don Bluth directed, and it's really, I think, a great animated short, and it's perfect for Christmas. That's all I got to say on that.
But I'm glad you reminded. Again, it's another thing. Like, I wouldn't have thought to remember to look for it on Disney Plus, because I haven't seen it in a while. But yeah, I know it is really great. So yeah, that is really cool. So anything else to go before we dive in? No, I don't think so. The rest will come up as we watch it. Yeah. The movie itself was, one of the reasons I look at it is like, I don't know exactly how it's remembered. I think maybe some people remember it as a flop. It wasn't a flop. It was just sort of a modest success. So
I didn't even know if it was a modest success.
Yeah. So in the world of Disney, it's not a huge success. It's almost kind of automatically like a flop. It's almost like somebody like Steven Spielberg's career. Like he has a lot of movies that like performed fine, but they weren't massive blockbusters. So people like misremember that they must have been like terrible flops. Not that he didn't have a few flops. Jay and I got into those in our own channel. But anyway, so this movie did perform okay. It's worth noting that in that summer, it went head to head at the box office against Shrek. So you kind of see where the world is going as far as animation goes, because Shrek would be a massive hit. And of course, it's starting to usher in the age where traditional hand-drawn animation would start to be replaced, which I think is one of the greatest crimes and tragedies of all time. This movie, of course, makes use of lots of computer animation. In fact, more than any other to date, and we will see that as we go forward. So, all right, now we will get on to it. So we'll do a 3, 2, 1, and go. All right, 3, 2, 1, hitting play. Here we go. I'll have to adjust my volume because I did a live commentary the other night by myself. I was going to be up really late, so I just decided to throw one on. I did The Young Master, an old Jackie Chan movie, because there's a quote. See?
There it is. Yep. Play-Doh.
In the depths of the sea. Okay.
360 BC.
There you go. Yeah, so it starts with a flashback to show that cataclysm. And as we can see, this is an idea that's been a lot of things too. The idea that they were super advanced, because look at their vehicles. So that's been around for a while too. This idea that before probably recorded history, there was actually civilizations that were way ahead of technology that wouldn't be seen for, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of years. Man, it still seems loud. But
now I know this has a lot of CG, but you do consider this still traditional animation for the most part, right?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. That's what it's based in.
I agree.
Your character models and everything else. I mean, it is a bit of a hybrid, as we'll see. There's going to be a lot of that.
It definitely is. Honestly, you were talking about earlier being kind of as we're doing the forgotten ones or the overlooked animated features. I didn't watch this until probably the last 10 years when another friend of mine, Chris, and I kind of went through all the Disney overlooked movies. And I liked it better than I thought I was going to.
Well, as I said, I didn't see it in the theater in 2001, and I'm almost at a loss as to when I did first see it. It wasn't like a lot of years, but I mean, it was probably at least 5, I would say. Something like that. So, of course, this language they're speaking here, this gets a lot of attention nowadays, and things like if you watch the Game of Thrones show, for instance, you'll notice a few fictional languages. And there's the Dothraki one, there's the High Valyrian, and of course, for the purposes of that show, they brought in like linguists and actually created a language. They did the same thing here. This Atlantean language was actually created by a linguist that they brought on, which is pretty cool. It doesn't really get brought up or talked about as the movies. And I think how this starts is our main character, played by Michael J. Fox, Milo. I think. Oh man, I've got the wrong subtitles up. I was messing with it. Now I've got.
Did it go to German again?
Yep. Yeah, actually, they seem to have gone to Spanish this time. There, I got it back. All right. So, of course, I'm a huge Michael J. Fox fan, so him being in anything is a bonus for me.
Oh, yeah, I like him a lot, too. My subtitles just disappeared.
Yeah, Disney Plus is really strange about his subtitles. Like, pretty much ever since I got it over 2 years ago. Was it 2 years ago? Something like that. I've always had to fight with them because they'll change them or just drop off like happened to me.
Yeah.
So this is 1914 is when the movie is set. An interesting time in history. All times are pretty interesting pretty much, but we're on the eve of the First World War, of course. So yeah, he's going through here just talking about that thing that gets talked about in a lot of these like ancient history shows. It's like, how can like all these civilizations that were so far away from each other and never had any contact, how can they have such similar, legends or such similar technology or such similar ideas? And they'll often use different reasons for that. Sometimes it's aliens, right? But in this case, it's like Atlantis. The idea that like Atlantis was kind of some hub
I find some of that very fascinating.
Right. And there's different, of course, versions of like how big Atlantis was. Like, was Atlantis just like a small island? Was Atlantis a whole fucking continent? You know, that kind of thing. It's not even the only lost continent. There was a proposed, it's completely fictional, but idea of a continent that would have been in the Pacific, basically taking up a lot of space between, like the edge of Asia and the western coast of North America. And it was called Mu. That it was a whole continent. It was really big. It was like
that. I think we'd notice by now.
Oh yeah,
but maybe
no.
not.
It's impossible. There's just it's a.
Isn't it usually portrayed as like a large metropolis?
Yeah, because the idea usually is like, regardless of how big the landmass was, the idea was like there was some sort of like capital major city on it. There was like some sort of really important hub of technology and culture and all that. Okay, so here we see he was just practicing. He's going to give the real lecture now, which I don't think goes quite as well.
They never do.
So he's supposed to be descended from, I guess it's his grandfather, who was obviously some sort of explorer. Originally, for some reason, they were going to have him be a descendant of, Edward Teach, Blackbeard. And they were like, maybe it would make more sense for him not to be the descendant of a pirate and maybe an explorer instead. But that was originally floated around. None of his whatever he worked on made it into the movie, but the original writer for this movie was Joss Whedon. But I don't know how much he did. But apparently, like nothing he contributed is in the movie. But he was the first writer, so that's kind of interesting too.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
A little note here. Are they cutting his funding or something? That usually happens. They're probably cutting his funding.
Yeah. Then you got all these richer, older dudes.
Yeah, and they're all saying how annoyed and sick they are of his stupid Atlantis theories.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've seen this a lot. Sort of the trope of like the young scientist out to prove something that nobody wants to listen to. It's especially worse if she's a woman, which is like what they did in the Mummy, the old Mummy movies with Brendan Fraser, where she. Because, at least as a man, Milo can be seriously accepted into academic circles, but back then, women wouldn't have been at all. But still, as you can see, nobody takes him seriously.
Yeah, he's still definitely the outcast or not liked in the circle.
I always think it's up by Iceland. See, that's one thing I do forget. I don't remember where geographically they do find it. It's called Atlantis, so the one thing everybody agrees is somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. Obviously, you can't have an ancient Greek myth about the Pacific because they didn't know about the Pacific. They weren't anywhere near it, So that's like the only thing that's really interesting. Some people think it's far in the south, far in the north, right in the middle. So I'm not sure where they're going to say it was. But there you go. See, it's the whole thing. Your grandfather was the loopy weirdo, and so are you. Ooh, wow, Hirsch.
It's cold. Now, did you know the submarine voyage at one time was going to, when they were redoing it, was going to be based off of an Atlantis theme at Disney World or Disneyland?
No, but I did know that, like, in the lead up, they had, for the promotion, they had already, before the movie came out, they'd already added something to Disney World and Disneyland for it. And I was looking a little bit at it on the Disney Wiki there. So that I didn't know that they were going to base it on it, but it makes sense. They did go to the trouble of making the thing.
Yeah, they had shut down the original submarine ride, which was like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea type theme, and they were going to do Atlantis, and then this didn't do very well, so then it sat until now it's Nemo. Yeah. Finding Nemo.
Ah, right, of course. And what we get here is funding from an old rich weirdo, of course. Mysterious. Again, I can't really cite exactly what other movies this is in, but I know this is in other stuff, Nobody listens to him, nobody believes him, but no, there's some old eccentric rich weirdo that's like, I believe in you and I'll fund the whole thing. What's going to happen here? Apparently he knew his grandfather. This is Preston Whitmore. So not to get into it, but with the Super Mario Brothers movie coming out and Mario being voiced by Chris Pratt, right? It's sort of once again sort of reignited the debate, which I've always been part of, which is like it's kind of annoying when you have characters who in video games or TV shows, animes, whatever like that, they rise to prominence and being voiced by professional voice actors, but then when it's time to cash in and do a big movie, it's not they don't keep the voice actor, they go to some big name, celebrity person.
I was just talking about this with Mario.
And I'm not against that all the time. I think, other actors can do voice work. Anyway, I'm not going to get into it, but something that's interesting with this movie is that it's a nice balance as the cast goes. Because on like sort of movie stars, you've got Michael J. Fox, you've got James Garner, and even Leonard Nimoy are in there. But they're balanced out with like some very experienced voice actors who've been all over the place. Cree Summer, of course, Corey Burton, even Jack Angel has a small role, and of course Jim Cummings, who's in fucking everything Disney has ever done. So people want to know the Jim Cummings voice. He's usually kind of a tough guy voice. He was the guard captain in Aladdin. He was the river guardian in Hercules. His best role was Darkwing Duck. He's the voice of Darkwing Duck.
He's basically the guy you come in and you need to replace a voice actor that's died on the spot. Because, I mean, he's also Winnie the Pooh. He's a lot of different characters that he's covered.
And to that point, Jim Varney is in this movie. And it's his last role. And he died during production. And it says that some of his later lines in the film were done by voice alikes. I wonder if it was Cummings.
I wouldn't be surprised.
I couldn't find out for sure if it was Cummings or not, but yes. So Jim Varney, this is his last role. He actually died during production.
Oh man, I forgot about that. I did know that at one time.
Yeah, his character's called Cookie or something.
Yeah, not to go back too far into the Mario again, but I do agree with you. And I was just speaking. My son and I and my wife watched the trailer tonight, and I'm like, I like it. It doesn't look bad, but there's no reason why they couldn't just use the Mario actor.
Yeah,
who's been doing the voice in the games for it's so iconic.
Yeah, it just kind of does seem like a slap in the face.
Yeah, and Luigi obviously too, and I think that's Charlie Day. Voices.
Yeah, I mean it's different with Bowser because Bowser traditionally doesn't have like a voice actor where he's speaking. He's usually just growling and making sounds.
Yeah.
So you couldn't really say, that person growling and making sounds is iconic, No. So I don't necessarily mind it's Jack Black, isn't it doing Jack Black? Because they're giving lines to a character that usually doesn't even have lines in the games. I mean, we won't speak of the abomination of that old animated.
I was going to say, you saying the cartoon?
Everything about those were awful.
But I mean, even what I heard of Bowser, Jack's doing what I would expect Bowser to sound like if he talks. It sounds fine. I'm fine.
Yeah, it sounds fine. All right, so here's this crack crew of amazing adventurers that he's going to work with. And they're all fine. I think one of the weaknesses of this movie is they try to make these characters stand out, but I don't know, none of them really are that memorable. Like, mostly I'm going to have good things to say about the movie. I like the movie a lot, but I can see some of the reasons why it isn't remembered as a classic or it didn't do great as a tremendous success. And I think one of them is the characters are a little bland. I mean, they're not bad, exactly. I don't know. They just they don't make much of an impact. Just kind of how I feel.
I would definitely agree with that. I mean, a lot of this has gone for it. It's just visually stunning. The story's pretty good, but you're right. The characters don't have a lasting impact necessarily.
Yeah. And speaking of voice actors and their presence in movies, it's kind of funny. Like there was that debate and things brought up. Like at one point it was like Harrison Ford had the biggest like grand total box office based on movies he'd been in. They did the most. Then there was a time where he was briefly surpassed by Samuel Jackson. But the difference would have been Samuel Jackson's movies. A lot of them, he's not necessarily a major part of them. For instance, Jurassic Park was a big one, and he's just a small character in that, and things like that. But then we got to the point where it was like, if you just want, like, just by being in the movie, it's Stan Lee, because Stan Lee did cameos in almost all the Marvel movies while he was alive, and if you add them up, they have the most. But if you go even further than that, the actual person who's been in the most, if you all add it up money-wise, is a voice actor. Now I can't think of his name. Oh, he's Megatron. Hold on, it'll come to me.
I know this.
Yeah, it's gonna nuts.
Get me when you find it.
I can't believe I'm forgetting. It's a name that I always know.
Oh gosh, it's
Frank Welker. It's Frank Welker.
Yes,
because Frank Welker. Yeah, because Frank Welker, in addition to just being prolific with his various voice speaking roles, it kind of goes back to what I was saying before about Bowser. If you had something in a movie that was fictional, like, and went growled or roared or something, it was probably Frank Welker doing it. So that's how he wound up sort of holding the title, because it extended even to roles like that, where literally his role is like making some sort of like animalistic sounds. Good old Frank Welker. I was really annoyed that when they did the 2007, the original, the first live action Transformers, that of course they brought Peter Cullen back, but they didn't bring Frank Welker, and they replaced him with Hugo Weaving.
I think their excuse was his voice had aged too much, which
that's what they said, but
I've villain
heard it since, so I don't know. Plus,
when
he did Megatron and things, they would usually had a sound effect to it. It's funny because Transformers, if you're familiar with the show, is littered with so many errors and mistakes and things like that, right? And usually they were animation errors, people, too many of them, or flipping their color, and a lot of times you would have guys speaking with the wrong voice and things like that. But every once in a while they would also forget voice effects. So it's like Frank Welker, in addition to doing Megatron, he also did Soundwave's voice. But Soundwave, we all know, if you know the character, has sort of like a weird robotic effect they put on it. It gives it sort of an echoey sound to it. But every once in a while, there's been episodes where like they forgot to put the effect on. So you hear how he does it. Voice. It's basically the same voice he did for Dr. Claw on Inspector Gadget.
Inspector Gadget, yeah.
And I saw a thing from him like maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and he could still do that, which I think is incredible. Because if there's ever a type of like voicing that'll like shred your vocal cords and something like that, it's so cool. Yeah, it's just so deep and so raspy. It's incredible. So anyway, we're off on our adventure here on their weird steampunk-esque ship. I guess he's some sort of geologist or something.
Now it is like a submarine type ship too, isn't it?
Yeah. Some sort of like hybrid.
Yeah.
Again, based on technology that wouldn't actually exist in 1914. That's the point. Because I think
there's a couple things like this so far I've seen in the movie that's like, oh, that wasn't really quite there yet.
Yeah, but that is deliberate. Again, they're going for sort of steampunk kind of alternate history type thing going on. So it's not necessarily they're being historically inaccurate. They're trying to be historically divergent, is I think kind of how it is.
Yeah, it's fun fantasy.
Yeah, exactly. So no issues there. I'm a big fan of the steampunk aesthetic. Anyway, so there you go. That's Corey Burton as Moliere, by the way. Corey Burton, another super prolific voice actor. So this guy's like a doctor. Yeah, so they're trying here hard. Like, you're getting the character introductions. It's like, here they are. Here's their weird quirk. They're trying to get it all in. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, because they do that in lots of movies. Just Speaking of Inspector Gadget, of course, Cree Summer, voice of Penny. She's going to show up here.
Really?
Yeah. Cree Summer, talk about a voice that doesn't age. She still sounds the same. And she's like, what, like 60? I don't know. She can still do like sort of a little girl voice. My favorite thing Cree Summer's done is not even necessarily a character. It's as a Canadian growing up, a magazine I used to read, and then they made a show. You might have heard of the Owl magazine. You hear of Owl magazine? Anyway, we had this magazine called Owl magazine, and there was even one for younger kids called Chickadee. And it was just basically, it was mostly like a nature magazine, but not always. It was just sort of a magazine for kids that was just sort of full of interesting facts. It was just like an educational thing. There'd be articles about the rainforest or, things like that. And they eventually did make a Saturday morning show out of it called Owl TV. And it was a live action show full of like weird little sketches and sometimes kids going off to learn things. But it had an and you can look it up on YouTube. It's a great opening. It had an animated opening with an actual owl sort of going around doing weird 90s things like skateboarding. But it had a really great song, and Cree Summer sang the song. And that's my favorite thing she did. So I urge anybody interested to look up clips of that, and it's specifically the opening theme, which is a really great song. New day, it's a brand new start. So it's a really great song. But I love Cree Summer for a lot of reasons, but that's my favorite. I have a bunch of those magazines back at my parents' place. They wanted to throw them out for years, and my sister wouldn't let them. But I always told my parents, I said, you can throw them out. I don't care. Just pick out like 5 or 6 of the ones in the best condition, and I'll take them. Maybe I'll try to remember to do that over Christmas finally. Because we had a bunch of them. But yeah, it was just sort of full of facts and things. I remember.
Sounds like that Owl TV. It barely aired in the U.S. It was on PBS and Showtime for a very short period of time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how long the show even ran in Canada, but I still remembered. But I liked it a lot. It was a really weird show.
85 to 90 was the original run, and then later 90 to 94 on CTV. Went from CBC,
and that's probably what I would have been watching. And I mean, maybe a little bit in the late 80s, but I was really young back then. But yeah, early 90s, I would have been watching it. Part of the Saturday morning lineup. Really fun show and an educational show. But it was a cool magazine. We even had some issues with Chickadee. But yeah, Cree Summer is Canadian, and she did that. A lot of the big voice actors are Canadian, or at least have some tie to Canadian. Peter Cullen, of course, who I mentioned, is another one.
A lot of great comedians out of there too.
I feel that's probably what they're best known for, the comedians. Just so many you can name. Right, so James Garner, I think, is the sort of military guy who's kind of in command here. Kind of what you expect. He's just like, this is a no-nonsense thing. I know we're here for your research, but, he's basically laying out that he's in charge, and he's going to treat it that way. Commander Lyle Tiberius Rourke. And one thing here about him is, like, this was not done too much in Disney movies originally, but became kind of annoying, I think, is, like, it happened in Frozen and a few other movies where, like, there's not really a clear villain at the start. And then it turns out one of the characters you think is the good guy emerges as the villain. That seems to happen too much. But back then it didn't happen much. But that's what happens with him. He's going to, like, become the villain. Spoilers, people, as we go.
You shouldn't be listening to us if you haven't at least seen this movie once.
So obviously here, this is very influenced by the scene in the movie version of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which I did watch on Family Channel back in the day. Made me terrified of underwater when the giant squid attacks.
Oh, yeah.
These things are worse than squids. I mean, there's Rich and then there's Rich. They've got this crazy floating fortress thing. And now they've even got little mini sub attacks. Like, that still doesn't exist in the world.
No.
It's pretty cool, though. But look at the size of that thing. I guess this is supposed to be proof that they're getting close to Atlantis, because these things are just enormous. So, like, 3 times bigger than Godzilla. It's Audrey. So I don't know who Jacqueline Obrador is, but that's who Audrey is. Because Cree Summer is actually the Atlantean like princess or whatever who they eventually meet. While this wasn't super successful, they did have a video game, and I think they had at least a short-lived like sequel show.
Well, and a direct-to-video sequel that was probably led into the TV show.
All right. Am I right about the show? Because I know for sure the director, Atlantis Milo's Return, released in 2003. Yes. Or maybe the show didn't wind up happening. I think they planned the show, and maybe it didn't wind up happening. That's what it is. But yeah, I think the video game actually came out before the movie. It's maybe part of its promotion. I don't know.
I believe that. Because just like the ride they were planning, thinking this was going to be a big hit.
Yeah. I mean, while, of course, we're at the beginning of the shift away from traditional animation, it's not like Disney didn't put everything they had into this. I mean, it was a big budget movie, and you can see the quality there. Milo, of course, is not cut out for this, and he's neurotic and worried. Just going through the water like they're flying. Oh, cracked glass. That's not a good thing at that depth. Ah, yes. So they found a big, huge air pocket. Like, do places like this exist? Maybe, but not this big, I don't think. Like an underwater cave where there's actually air. I mean, this was just an enormous cavern, big enough to hold like a city.
Deep into the ocean?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe. Hell, we don't know.
Well, that's true, because it's like what? It's like 90% of the world's oceans aren't explored, right? Or something like that.
A good chunk of, I don't know the exact percentage. But yeah, I've read that many times and still isn't.
Yeah. I mean, there's another thing. A lot of people died in that, and they're pointing that out. So, like another movie that Jay and I had done, The Black Cauldron, this also was PG, which separated it from the others. It would have been the second at the time, third overall, because the movie Walking with Dinosaurs was originally released as G, but later in 2008 they added the PG. So it's one of three, but it was technically the second, even though it came out after Walking with Dinosaurs.
So Walking with Dinosaurs, though, that doesn't really count as their animated feature classics, though, does it?
I don't count it, but I guess some people do.
Oh.
If the animated canon, or however you want to put it.
I didn't remember this was PG either.
Yeah. I mean, they didn't show anybody die, but they had to acknowledge that they lost people there. Because there had been 200 of them, and now there's like a quarter of that. You useless egghead. Yeah, they got a cool digger device there that I like. The big drill. We'll see that in action later. One thing I don't think it's talked enough about in Android animation like this are lighting effects. Because lighting effects is completely different in animation than real life, and that you're not really using light, but you're using techniques to create the, image of light. It's just one of my favorite things, and when it's done well, it looks so good. One of the best examples you can think of, and you see it in all sorts of anime, but really to start was like Akira, of course, in 1988. The lighting in that is incredible, even by today's standards. So that's one of the things I really enjoy seeing in an animated thing like that, is the lighting effects. Because it's not lighting traditionally as we know it, but it recreates it so well. Looks so cool. So that's the explosives expert, who's obviously really into blowing things up. We might have missed his introduction. His name's Vinny. His last name, I'd written it down, is Santorini, which just making he's an Italian guy. But the Santorini Islands were, I don't even know if they exist anymore, but they had been a series of volcanic islands in the Mediterranean that apparently had some eruptions a long time ago, even predating back then. So a lot of people think that it's possible that maybe that's where Plato heard about this legend of Atlantis, was the idea that some of those islands, their volcanoes had erupted and destroyed, cities. So that's what his name is a reference to. I remember this from the thing. He's going to say, I made a bridge. There you go. They're being watched. Now it's very cold. Well, we've reached some sort of montage. Show us, I guess, gives the impression of how far they're traveling. Oh, that was short, actually. But still, I guess they got it across. They're very far in. Yeah, we get it. You're a pyromaniac. Yay, time to use the drill machine. That was easy. Oh, the linguist knows some stuff about machines. Cut out your 1914 mansplaining. Looks like the Bridge of Khazad-dûm. You shall not pass.
You shall not pass. Yeah, Jim Varney.
Oh, there's Cookie, yeah. Hilarious. Whoopee cushion. That's cutting edge comedy in 1914, I'm sure. I mean, classic. Charlie Chaplin's about to blow everyone's minds. They don't know. I mean, there's a good quote here from Kirk Wise, one of the directors, talking about, this is from back then, I think. We're talking about traditional animation and the shift, the competition with the CGI films. He says, any traditional animator, including myself, can't help but feel a twinge. I think it always comes down to story and character, and one form won't replace the other. Just like photography didn't replace painting, but maybe I'm blind to it. I mean, it's unfortunate that in the West, it really kind of has replaced it. At least as far as like big feature-length films go. I mean, yeah, they still use them for TV shows. But it's really Japan that's kept it going. They're the only country that really produces big budget 2D animation movies anymore.
I really hope Disney comes back to those. I mean, even if they don't do them as often.
Yeah, like The Princess and the Frog really gave me a lot of hope back then.
Me too, and I really enjoyed that one.
Yeah, me too. And then there's just nothing since. I mean, again, I get why the movie wasn't super successful, but it wasn't anything to do with the animation style.
I think it did real. Are you talking about this or The Princess and the Frog?
Princess and the Frog. Or
I thought it did pretty good though.
Okay, maybe it did. Then
I mean, it wasn't a big Lion King, but
yeah. Because I mean,
I think it was Winnie the Pooh. The new one they did right after that was their last hand drawn.
Yeah, what was that, like 2011?
Yeah, and that didn't do very well.
Yeah,
might even been.
I saw that in theater because exactly for that point. I went to see that in the theater just to support it. I mean, it was fine.
It was okay.
It delivered what it promises.
But I love Princess and the Frog. I thought that was really well done. And Santorini Island, I think, is still around. Yeah,
I think there was more than one. Like, it was kind of a series of islands, and a few of them are gone now because of the eruptions or something like that. I don't know. Yeah. It's something, yeah. But yeah, at least one, if not more, are still around, yeah. But it's hard because of ancient records. But supposedly, this would have been centuries before the eruption of Mount Vesuvius even. It was supposedly like maybe more than one eruption, and it was even more powerful. Might have wiped out the Minoan civilization. So that might be where it comes from. Because, I mean, the Greeks also had a sort of a weird definition of the sea. They knew about the Mediterranean. I don't know how much they knew about the Atlantic beyond it. It was more of a theory than necessarily known. Don't quote me on that because it depends upon the era and everything. I'm talking about classic Greece. I'm talking about the age of Plato. I'm talking about ancient world, BCE. You know, I hear people like complain about like those terminologies like BCE and CE and stuff like that. And I realize that they're all based on sort of a Western-centric view of the world. But I mean, you have to have something as the standard, you know? Yeah. So, I mean, that's what it is. I don't think it's bad or racist or anything. So something's the standard. Because, I mean, it's just the same thing like with the calendars and stuff. You know, different civilizations had different calendars, but eventually we had to settle on one, you know? I don't know. And I mean, as far as that goes, other cultures still use their calendars to a certain extent. I mean, as far as like what certain days mean and things like that. So I don't know. That was one of the things that was really impressive about, say, the Mayans, is that they had such a sophisticated calendar centuries before other civilizations would develop. But, you know, the other ones were really flawed. You'd have extra days and things you'd have to eliminate. The Mayans were much closer to what we have now. There's a little bit of Mayan influence in this. As we said, they took inspiration from a bunch of different cultures. It was kind of the point to make sort of a melange and make it seem like it wasn't just, you know, ancient Greece underwater. It's pretty good. They're going to break through soon, and we'll see it.
Which I think, like you brought up earlier, a lot of these, they had similar stories, a lot of these different cultures that were completely spread out from each other. So I find it fascinating to kind of combine those into the one large story.
Right. A big one is the flood myth. Like almost any like ancient culture you can come up with had a flood myth. Of course, religion, the one a lot of people know religion is the biblical flood with Noah, but there's quite a few different flood myths from different cultures. Again, very spread apart from each other. So it's interesting that they would all develop one. Other stuff too, but that's the one I think of the most is the flood. This idea of the known world being wiped out by the flood. Hey, Jay, what's going on?
Hello.
We're back to it with the animation. Oh, Jay. See, really when you see a bridge like this, you always knew the whole point was the bridge was either going to get completely destroyed or part of it was going to break away. You know, the first shot of the bridge, you know, that bridge is coming down. So once again, they're losing more people. Some people have already gone over. These guys.
There's a lot of great shots in this. Just a lot of great shots.
The action, yeah. I mean, the action is just so well plotted out and planned out. I assume, you know, storyboard method and all that. But there is an amazing shot towards the end. Trying to remember what the term for it is. That was incredibly sophisticated. They'd done one similar again in the last movie that these people had done, which was which was Hunchback of Notre Dame, where it's just sort of one of those camera pulling back shots and revealing Paris or whatever like that. They do something similar here, where they're going to do towards the end, they're going to do a camera pulling back and reveal sort of the restored Atlantis. I'm trying to remember what the hell that's called, because I had just been reading about it earlier today and looking up stuff about this. I don't care about reception.
It's not where they pan back and it in the background focus. No, that's a different shot.
I had it, but now I'm not sure where it was. It's not in production yet. But there was an actual term for it. Okay, no. Now there's even less of them, and they've lost even more of their equipment. They had some cross promotion with Frito-Lay.
Did it?
And McDonald's.
I kind of remember the McDonald's promotion. Kind of.
I don't think I do. Oh, it's called a pull-out scene. Anyway, it's right towards, it's like basically the last shot before the credits roll. I think it's called a pull-out scene. Again, it's the idea of sort of a camera pulling back and revealing something very large and detailed. Okay, so fair. He's met one of the Atlanteans. I guess that's like their weird princess or something. There's another one of those movies where like they do actually deal with the problem of language. Obviously, these people don't speak English, but then they solve it really fast anyway. It's like Milo can figure out a language in 2 seconds. You know? Because most movies, they don't even care. It's just like everybody speaks English, no matter where they are or what's going on. Gee, I wonder why they ran from me. Oh, maybe it's the gigantic drill machine behind me. But yeah. It's like it's like an ecosystem down here. A Jefferson Davis reference, okay. The South shall rise again.
Oh my goodness.
They got scary masks, but behind it, they're just people. See, he's already starting to pick some of it up, which I think is pretty much impossible.
Yeah.
Because believe me, if I could just, like, I'm learning Japanese formally now, but I just mean I hear it and listen to it and I'm exposed to it so much on like a daily basis that if you could just learn it that way, like I would have already. But you need to have context. Because I'm not talking about immersion, because obviously that's how I learned French, but I was in French immersion. I'm just talking about, you know, playing video games where the characters are speaking Japanese and things like that. Like I don't have any reference to, maybe I can pick out a word here or there. But
yeah.
Yeah, so he says their language must be based on a root dialect. It's just like the Tower of Babel.
Oh,
typical
so
American. I'll just speak English really loud at them. And boom, they're speaking English. See,
and she can. I was just gonna say, and she can speak it.
Yeah, it's kind of like what they did with Wonder Woman in Themyscira. It's like, I'm kind of surprised you speak English. It's like, we speak all the languages of men. It's like, oh, that's convenient.
Yes.
Because, I mean, I do get some of the premise of what they're saying here. I'm talking about a root language, a language that many other languages developed from. But it doesn't work this smoothly.
No, but they've got to, obviously, for...
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I at least give them credit for having them speak the language to start with. But, I mean, that's the thing that's a little disappointing, is like most movies, because they'll drop that authenticity for the sake of just keeping things simple. You know, one of my favorite. I'm not a big Quentin Tarantino fan, but one of my favorite movies by him is the World War II one, Inglourious Basterds. And what I really like about Inglourious Basterds is people are speaking the languages they're supposed to be speaking. You know, but there's a really annoying part in the movie that kind of undermines some of that, because at the very end, you remember the whole plan. There's two plans. The bastards have their own plan to kill Hitler, and then there's the French woman who escaped, who has her own plan to burn the fucking thing down. And you might remember she made her own little movie to show on the screen to talk to them for that. And at one point she switches to English, which makes zero sense. Like, if anything, you should be speaking German if you really want them to understand it before they die.
Oh, yeah.
So it kind of undermines it. In a movie where everybody, again, is speaking what they're supposed to be speaking and relying on subtitles, which I don't think is a problem. So there's Leonard Nimoy, who also, of course, has his foot in the Transformers universe. He's not in the show, but he was the movie, so original voice of Galvatron in the movie, which I just got the other day, and oh yeah, we're going to do it.
I was wondering if you, because we were talking about it earlier, and I almost said, oh, isn't that going to be on our list? And I didn't want to give anything away.
Yeah, we'll give it away. Like, I'm hoping it might take some while to coordinate, so it's a little ways off. But I'm hoping that you, and we can get Ryan in on it too. I'd really love to do one for that movie.
That'd be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to that.
So I just got this yesterday, finally. Nice. Steelbook edition.
Very cool.
Yeah, we had I was a huge Transformers fan, but what's weird is I was a little too young to have seen the movie. So when I was watching the Transformers, the 3 seasons that they would just sort of repeat, I knew something happened between the 2nd and 3rd season, but I didn't even know the movie existed. And I was just like, Prime is gone. You know, it was like a big hole. And sometimes they would show some scenes in those recaps. You would see like the thing where Rodimus grabs the Matrix, transforms or goes from Hot Rod to him, and then like throws him out of Unicron. I always thought those were episodes that I just didn't see at first. And it wasn't for quite a while that I found out it was a movie.
It was the movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was big into that in 85, 86. 86 might have been.
Yeah. 86 was the year of the movie.
Yeah.
In between,
I had
bridging the gap between the 2nd
shirt
and 3rd.
was Transformers the movie.
Oh, awesome.
My first day of kindergarten.
But yeah, see, I was like a few years too young. So by the time I was watching Transformers, it was already over. I didn't know that. They were already, because there was only 3 seasons. And they were repeating it. We didn't get the Japanese series. I had one of them, but I'm missing. And the one that's closest that works as the direct sequel, of course, is Headmasters, which
I don't know if
I probably should have bought. Well, the way Transformers ended was, it's technically, you could say it's actually 4 seasons, because you have 3 full seasons. And then in North America, you had either, I can't remember, it was 3 episodes or 5 episodes. I think it was supposed to be 5, and they broke it down 3. It was called The Rebirth. And it introduced the concept of the Headmasters. But in Japan, they ignored those and made a whole season about the Headmasters. And there's a key difference explaining how the technology works. In the North American version, again, which was only a few things, it was the idea that certain Autobots and Decepticons landed on that planet and met these aliens that were more or less humans with different colored skin, and that they combined their technology. And it was like those beings, they would turn into the heads or the weapons, because you have Headmasters with the heads and the Target Masters with the weapons, and they would turn and they could transform. So they would bond. It was the idea of an organic being bonding with that, whereas there's no organic stuff involved in the Japanese version. Instead, it's just like smaller robots working with bigger robots, which I always thought made more sense. And that's what they seem to base the toys on. What's weird is at that, they were my favorite toys by far. It was my favorite show. But when they started with the gimmicks, like the Power Masters, the Headmasters, the Target Masters, that's when I lost interest, which is weird because I'm kind of obsessed with them now. You don't want to know what I paid for a pretty new version of, I don't have them because I send them with my parents, is the Target Master version of Cyclonus. Like, I already owned a Cyclonus, but I wanted the Target Master version, so, and I paid a lot for them, but I love them.
So in the series, what did you see first of the quote 4th season, the Japanese version or the North American?
I mean, it's really hard to remember now. I don't even know. I mean, that 4th season, again, was only a few episodes. And by the time I started watching the show, it was over. So I don't even know if they've ever bothered replaying them. So I honestly can't remember. And as far as the Japanese show goes, I never owned it, but I've seen parts of it. It's actually kind of famous because it has some really, really terrible dubs in some other languages that you can look up on YouTube, where they give them really bizarre dialogue or really bizarre voices. It's pretty funny. Yeah, if you just look up like Headmaster's dub on YouTube, you can find some really hilarious sounding dubs that aired in places like China and Singapore and places like that. They're really weird.
Did they ever do them with the actual Transformer American voices?
No. If you buy the Headmaster series, it's in Japanese with English subtitles. So you have to watch a thing. So it's the characters, but it's weird because now they all have different voices, obviously, and yeah. So it's a disconnect. It's a disconnect for sure. Anyway, so we got some bonding here between him and her. That's the other thing is like even though they survive, they're cut off from like their own history. See? So he's going to help them sort of like rediscover it with his linguistic skills, which it's weird that he would know better than them, but apparently he does. Because that's the thing. Like they were super advanced, but ever since the Cataclysm, they've sort of limped on as like a very technologically inferior thing, with spears and shit for 2,000 years or however long it's been. And he's going to help them rediscover their lost technology. See, there's one of their flying things that we saw at the start.
Looks like some sort of vehicle.
A vehicle. Yes, and this is another thing that I can't really point to what specifically, but you see this a lot where it's like crystal-based technology. It's like you stick a crystal somewhere and power up. Like it's in, say, Zelda Breath of the Wild, for instance. You play that game, you want to power up this stuff. You have like a weird crystal type thing you put in, and it all boots up.
Oh, it's in all sorts of fantasy story stuff. Yeah.
And that's what's going on here. Especially that whole lighting up with the blue thing. Another game I can remember is from the first Metroid Prime. You insert a disc or a thing, and everything starts to light up in cool, like blue glowing symbols. It's all over the place, but
well, I mean, you've got it in even like Superman and Star Wars things. That crystals have these powers like that, this energy.
Yeah, it's this idea of taking technology but trying to make it look old at the same time.
Yeah,
and that's really what it is. It's like we don't want to show like machine parts really, and we don't want to show anything that will make you think of like digital technology now. So it's like some sort of like weird hybrid. Well, Jay, you should I know you're not big on Avatar, Jay, so just watch this movie instead of The Shape of Water or whatever, The Way of Water or whatever it's called. Same kind of deal going on here. Although we don't get a sex scene, unfortunately. Disney's not ready for that frontier. This movie's PG, though, so there's a step.
Yeah, this is definitely worth, if you're a fan at all of animation or Disney animation, definitely worth at least a watch.
Yeah. As we said, it wasn't like it was a big failure or something. It was the timing and things like that. It was just at a time when they were shifting away, where audiences were more interested in something like that Shrek would offer. I only of the Shrek movies go, I love the second one, but that's it. I think the first one's super overrated. I think the third one is downright bad. And I think the fourth one is very forgettable. I really like the second one. I think it's one of the best comedies of the 2000s. I think it's that good.
Oh, I like the first two, but yeah, I don't.
I think the first one's fine. I just think I can't believe it was huge. It was a phenomenon at the time. I was like, it's okay. I thought the second one was more like what the praise of the first one seemed to fit more with the second one to me. I thought the second.
Well, in family animation, I think Shrek, the original one, it's not by far shocking now, but I feel like it was kind of still shocking then, some of the content.
Well, that's what a lot of people talked about, right? They're like, kids will like it, but there's all sorts of like in jokes that like a parent, like an older person can get.
Yeah,
I guess so. You're right. It doesn't seem like it's over 20 years later now. So, but if you look at it through the lens of the time, that's probably a fair comment.
It's my best guess. That's kind of, I think, how I felt about it. I was like, oh, this was not what I was expecting. It's pretty funny. And you're right. 3 and 4. I thought 3 was almost tolerable the first time I watched it, but then yeah, it's
really
definitely got worse every viewing.
I mean, I maybe only did see it the one time, but I guess I could revisit it. But
I wouldn't.
I remember really not liking it. It also seemed like a step back for his character. Like they'd already had this journey in the first 2 movies, and it felt like in the third one, it's like he's just an ununderstanding jerk again for some reason.
Yeah.
Like, come on.
And like you said, the fourth one's damn near forgettable. I don't remember hardly anything about it. And I don't care to.
I recall death.
I am still here.
That's the other thing. These are some, speaking of that idea, almost like these are some sort of more mature concepts too for a Disney animated film. You know, she's talking about what she just says, you know, we're not thriving. Our culture is dying. We're just sort of limping along here, and we've forgotten our way and our past, which is, you know, more of a kind of more heavy theme than you would see in a lot of these movies. You know, they're a lot more simplistic in something like an Aladdin or something like that, where it's just like, I'm a princess who wants to be free. The vizier wants to take over. Aladdin wants to show his worth, you know.
Well, that kind of makes sense because, I mean, if people, they're looking to go to see something like that and they don't get it, of course they're going to be.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of those movies boil down to, like, it's a good message, but it's really overused. Is, you know, you have to be yourself, you know, and be happy with who you are. You know, don't try to be somebody else. You know, don't be down on yourself, accept who you are and embrace who you are. And, you know, if you believe in yourself, you can do the things, you know, that's kind of repeated in all these movies. It's not a bad message by anything, but it does get a little old. So it's nice in a movie like this where you can step away from that. I mean, Milo, of course, has a bit of that in his journey, but really the whole thing was he always believed in himself, just nobody else believed in him.
Exactly,
you know?
Yeah.
He was sure that his theories were right and he could find things, but nobody believed him. I'll give Milo credit. I mean, they say, you know, this is not a physical guy, but he's swimming better than I probably could.
Well, I know definitely underwater. I'm not a bad swimmer either, but asthmatic chain smoker, I wouldn't be holding my breath that long.
I miss swimming. And you think, oh, don't you get opportunities? I guess I do. It's just like it's just such a hassle with contacts. I don't want to be blind when I swim. It's not like I'm blind with them, but I'll tell you, one of the things that happened to me that really messed up my day was last night I went to bed pretty late, and I was in bed for over 2 hours. Still couldn't sleep anyway. It wasn't working. It was about 6 a.m, and I got up to go to the fridge. I can't even remember what my reasoning was now, because one of the things I really rely on is chocolate milk for like when I go to sleep and when I wake up. It's like the last thing I drink when I go to bed and the first thing I drink when I wake up. It kind of makes my mouth feel a little better before you can do stuff like brush your teeth or anything. And I had run out of chocolate milk, and I knew this. But I had white milk, and I had instant breakfast. So I guess to remind myself that whenever I got up today that I would have to make instant breakfast, what I don't usually do is I took one of my glasses out and I put it on the counter by the microwave across from the fridge. So around 6 in the morning, I went out to the kitchen. I can't remember exactly what my intent was, but I guess it's just a combination of like being so tired, and even though they didn't seem to really be working, the medication I take making me all fuzzy and uncoordinated. I don't even think I was trying to do anything with the glass, but I just knocked the glass right off, man. And it shattered on the floor. And this was one of my bigger, heavier glasses. So it just shattered everywhere, big, huge pieces. So now I can't see very well, and I'm not fully awake or anything. And I'm trying to clean up the glass, the big pieces, and trying to worry about the little pieces, and of course I still wind up stepping on it. And I get a sliver in my foot, and I'm bleeding all over the place. So I had to go get one of my big bandages. I'm lucky I even have them, but it's in an awkward place near the front of my foot. So the edges of the bandage are actually touching like the bottoms of my toes. It's just so uncomfortable. And I didn't get to sleep until like 8:45 or something. And really, I mean, yeah.
Okay, so that's what you mentioned that to me.
Yeah. So, I mean, and then I came out today. It wasn't until I put my contacts in. I got most of the glass, but there's still little pieces that I missed that I vacuumed up. But geez, it's stressful. All right, here's the big turn. I'm actually a bad guy. And at the moment, it looks like they're all on his side. But of course, it's not going to go that way. This is what we brought all these guns for. It is kind of weird because, like, there's this group of 200 people that get whittled down by misfortune and disaster. And now suddenly half of them are bad guys.
It's kind of funny he said, and he's a bad guy. And he's like, I prefer the term adventure capitalist.
Adventure capitalist, yeah. There you go. I don't care about their life force. I'm just gonna make money from it. No. Does she stay bad? Because I know most of them, like this guy, and they come around and they help him. Yeah, and you get some vibes from Avatar in there. It's like,
oh, definitely. There's been a few moments of that throughout this.
Yeah, because you have the main character is like, no, I'm on their side now, and then he has a few friends that are like, we're with you too, and that's gonna happen here. So I guess the blonde must stay bad. I think she seemed awfully mean there.
I don't remember for sure, but I feel like she does too.
But the others, I know they join him. The explosives guy, the rock guy, the mechanic girl. This also has shades of a Studio Ghibli movie, Castle in the Sky.
Oh, yes.
Because that's about an ancient lost civilization in a place, in that case, a floating island, with its own lost technology that stumbled across, and they find it in a really big, weird steampunk, in this case, airship, as opposed to sub. It also has like long dormant technology that gets reawakened, and it also has like a bad guy in the English dub. He's played by Mark Hamill, by the way, who wants to take it over for his own thing. So it has a big. So as far as plot wise, it's very close to that film, which I believe was 86. But speaking of anime, actually, this movie gets compared to an anime series called Nadia, The Secret of Blue Water, which was an anime in the 90s that I've seen some episodes of. And yeah, it is very similar. Even the art style is similar, although, again, that's not really on purpose because they really are going off Mignola's designs. And again, if you're familiar with Mike Mignola and his style, you can see it all over this. So, but yeah, I mean, that's nothing new for Disney, right? I mean, Lion King is one of their biggest hits ever, and everyone's like, it's just Kimba the White Lion.
Kimba, yep.
There's been a few times where they've been accused of kind of ripping off stuff that had been done in anime. But I mean, I get what
I think their biggest thing they were promoting that so big as, oh, this is our first original story.
Yeah, for Lion King, right? It's not based on a fairy tale or a legend or anything. It's completely original, although it's kind of Kimba the White Lion crossed with Hamlet.
I didn't know the whole Kimba thing till about 10 years after The Lion King was released, and then I went back. I watched Kimba.
Yeah, it was for me probably a similar timeline too.
It is very hard to argue that they did not steal that.
Yeah. But I mean, for me, really, with this movie, the plot is really similar to Castle in the Sky. I mean, it's different because our main character is actually like sort of a scientist, and there's an expedition, and but what's happening is just so similar.
But that's kind of a basic plot line of a lot of adventure stories, isn't it?
Yeah, discovering a lost civilization with weird technology. Bad guys wanting to exploit it. Good guys wanting to protect it. Yeah, I get it.
You got your scientist guy. You got your
Yeah. And I mean, in the case of Castle in the Sky, they kind of leave that different things. It's just about a boy sort of stumbling onto it, the girl having some sort of weird link to it through her family, and then you got a whole bunch of air pirates for sort of comedic relief, which is pretty cool. But I mean, there's some shots in this like where, yeah, she's like, I can't remember what's exactly going to happen to her here, but she's going to get like kind of like taken over or possessed by it or something, and she's like floating. I can see why this another reason that makes this movie PG, because I mean it's cool, but I guess to a little kid it might actually be a bit disturbing what's going to happen here.
Well, like the Black Cauldron, it's got a darker theme than a lot of Disney movies.
And at least they left it intact. In the case of the Black Cauldron, they cut out a bunch of stuff and messed with a bunch of stuff. And I mean, the movie still had its problems, and Jay and I go in pretty good detail, I think, in our show about it. But here we go. See, now it's like speaking through her in English. She gonna walk across the water? Looks like she is. I already see people flipping out about that. You can't have a person walking on water. That's what Jesus did. That's sacrilegious.
Now, have you seen the previews going back to our last commentary we did for Slumberland?
Yeah, I'm gonna watch it. It's on Netflix now. I'm definitely gonna watch it. Maybe when I get back to Sydney.
I knew you had mentioned that was coming when we did that commentary, but it was just so amazing. Right after we did that, I started seeing that all over the place.
Yeah, so it's out now on Netflix. It's on. I'm gonna watch it. I think I'm gonna wait until I'm in Sydney in about a week and a half or 2 weeks. And I'm gonna watch it there. I think might as well watch it on a bigger TV. It looks pretty cool. I don't know. We'll give it a shot.
Yeah, you have to let me know what you think. I don't know when I'll watch it.
Well, yeah, I'm definitely interested in it. Jason Momoa as the flip character is certainly an interesting interpretation.
Very.
I mean, why not?
Again, especially after we just watched the cartoon.
Yeah.
But there's several things different. Obviously, the lead character is a girl now instead of a boy.
Mm-hmm. Fine. Like I said,
that's fine.
I think I talked about this before. I almost have a preference for girl characters in those sorts of stories, although you need boys too. And that's how I write. I almost usually always have female. I don't know. Just because my favorites have it, it doesn't mean there aren't good boy ones. But I mean, I think of something again. They're big classics like Alice in Wonderland and Wizard of Oz with Alice and Dorothy. They kind of laid the foundation for it. But you can see it in other things too. I really like Coraline, the Neil Gaiman story, which they made into a pretty good movie. I really like that movie, but I kind of hate that it's become the definitive look for it. Because people are like, I dressed up like Coraline. It's always exactly like in the movie. It's just like, well, the movie's one version. I like the movie. I'm just saying it doesn't have to be the be-all, end-all. It's not how I picture it when I read it. But it's a little different for me because, I mean, I was familiar with Coraline for many years before the movie ever came out.
I was not.
2009. Yeah. So, yeah, it's like possessed her. I don't know what's going on exactly. Let's see what happens here. So I'm a little fuzzy on what exactly happens. I know the whole place is going to start to like fall apart.
As you say that, yep.
She has some sort of like invisible force field, as we see. Illustrated nicely by the water. The second Uncharted video game is kind of like that too, where you wind up in an ancient lost place and there's like some brutal warlord that wants to take it over and use its technology. So yeah, it's all over the place. I've always liked the idea of a prehistory, which really I think started, I mean, it's been around for a while, but I think in earnest was if you heard about like the Hyperborean age from the Conan stories, the original Conan stories, this idea that, civilization as we know it has been around about 9,000 years. The earliest civilizations you can find date back to about 7,000 BCE, the Mesopotamian stuff, Sumerian. That's the oldest of the old, where people started to like build a civilization, use a written language, live in like communities that they built, do things like agriculture, things like that. Before that, humans were hunter-gatherer societies, right? Just tribes. But the idea of like Hyperborea and others is the idea that like, if you go back even further to maybe 15,000 years ago, or even earlier than that, there were actually civilizations that were as advanced as ones that would show up thousands of years later. But then something wiped them all out and humans had to start over again. So that gets in there a lot. Because even in the Conan thing, there's an even older civilization based on Atlantis with Lemuria in there, because a lot of people know Conan, but there's an older character known as Kull, who was part of the same stories written by the same author whose name, something I can't remember. That guy, early 20th century, who was friends
with Kull the Conqueror or something like that.
Yeah, eventually stuff got called Kull the Conqueror. There's been spin-offs of it. All that stuff is like public domain. Like I'm pretty sure, or no, it's not now. I think Marvel owns it, but for a long time it was public domain. Anybody could do like Conan or
well, you can. You still can. You just can't do anything that Marvel created with that lore.
Yeah, it's something like that. Yeah, because what is it? Robert Howard? Robert E. Howard? Something like that. Hold on.
Sounds.
Get his name right. He was really young. He like shot himself when he was like 30. Robert E. Howard, yeah. And Robert E. Howard was friends with H.P. Lovecraft, so they intertwined their lore too. So that there's Lovecraftian stuff going on in some of the stories about that. It's pretty cool. It was cool how like we talk about shared universes now, like that did exist beforehand, and one of the good ones was the Lovecraftian one, because the Lovecraft had a circle of friends and authors, and they all wrote stuff that kind of touched on each other and sometimes overlapped. It's really cool. But yeah, Robert E. Howard. He was 30 years old. And he shot himself. I think his mother died, and that was it for him. He didn't want to live, and he killed himself. But he was a man's man. He was kind of a prototype. I mean, he would have been around the same time as somebody like Hemingway, right? The idea of like getting rid of the stereotype of the sensitive, withdrawn writer. But he's a writer, but he's a manly man. He's a physical man. He likes guns and all that stuff. All right, so now something's happening to Leonard Nimoy's character. He seems to be dying. Internal bleeding. Yeah, his mom died of tuberculosis. And he was big into boxing. Manly pursuits. But yeah, a lot of his Conan stories didn't even get published until well after his death. But yes, he would have been part of the Lovecraft circle. I'm trying to look up some of the other authors that would have been in there. Ooh, so there's some flashbacks. But yeah, in that one, like Kull, I can't remember if they name Atlantis specifically, but Lemuria is one of them. The idea of Kull would have lived about 50,000 years ago, and the idea was there was a civilization that eventually went under the sea just like that. So they're doing something similar here. Obviously, some civilization that predates any known civilization and is only passed forward in myth, like something like what Plato said. It's an interesting idea. Can't entirely be disproven. You could discover something. It seems unlikely. It seems pretty clear that mankind had the arc that they've had. Because if you really are talking about humans that sophisticated existing that long ago, it doesn't really line up with what we know about our own evolution. If you're talking about beings that are considered humans like 50,000 years ago, they just did not have the mental capacity to really have a civilization. That's why they were hunter-gatherers. He's laying out pretty well, yeah. The Kaiser, that's the big bad of 1914. Kaiser Wilhelm. The most evil German of all time. I'm gonna get this big doohickey to fly. It says follow my lead, but I don't think they all have magic crystals on there. Go flying fish robot. I don't think that's good 1914 dialogue. I don't think anybody talked about things being sporty in 1914. When you think about what cars looked like back then. You look at like a Model T. It's like, I'd rather something more sporty, you know?
That is pretty sporty. Yeah, I think you're right. I don't think that was a...
Yeah, I don't care. It's fun to point out. I'm not saying like everybody should talk the way people talked in 1914 for a movie like this. But it doesn't know I mean like a more serious type movie.
That was like you brought up, or we talked about earlier, for this type of movie. There's definitely some inaccuracies as far as the time period, but
right, that's cool. More fantasy based, which is cool.
Yeah,
but I think a lot of people do underestimate just how differently, just like people talk over the years, over the centuries, the decades. We can see it in some movies, the time capsule. You know, you watch an old enough movie, you see how they speak differently. So it's always been that way. And there's, phrases and expressions that they use then that we don't use now, and vice versa. Take them by surprise how? Yeah, they got guns. Like, these things fly. Did they shoot something? I can't remember. We only saw them just
they were shooting earlier, weren't they?
Oh, in the opening?
I thought so. The big...
Yeah, maybe. Let's see what they do here. And I mean, having all the guys that become bad guys have those masks on helps too, right? We don't feel bad when they die. We kind of dehumanize.
Yeah, they're kind of the generic soldier. Yeah. You're not really looking at them as humans, even though they are.
I really would like to see this alternate 1914 that they have, because clearly World War I would have been much different. I mean, even take out the Atlantean technology. Just look at some of their technology. Like, that gigantic sub they had probably could have won the war.
And I mean, they've had subs since, I think, the late 1800s?
Yeah.
But not anything close to this.
I mean, I don't want to be in the most sophisticated sub in the world now. Can you imagine being a sub during, World War I?
No.
Oh, my God. I just want to kill myself. I know I often get World War I's a big specialty of mine. I've done some papers on it, things like that, so it's easy for me to get into it. But just mean, and I won't go off on a big diatribe on it. But yeah, I think that the war at sea is one of the most overlooked parts of World War I. World War I always conjures up sort of the same image, which is the Western Front, which is the battle of attrition in the trenches, in no man's land and barbed wire. And that's true. It was a huge part of the war. But I mean, it was the first real global war, world war. It was fought on many fronts. And one aspect of the war that doesn't get talked about much is the war at sea, including the first ever use of subs in combat, the German U-boats.
Well, isn't that the case for any war? I mean, that has had sea battles. You don't see many of the actual...
I mean, well, World War II gets a lot more as far as sea battles goes, because you can split it into... Because you can split it into the European theater, which of course had its own sea battles. But when you really think about the sea battles of World War II, you think about the Pacific. You think about the U.S. and the Japanese forces. The two biggest navies, most powerful navies in the world, going at each other. So World War II, I think the sea battles get brought up a bit more. Oh, the blonde! He just betrayed the blonde. She's dead. Typical Disney death. Fall. We don't see them land, just like Gaston and many others. So yeah, the blonde actually stayed with him on his side, and then he just betrayed her and killed her. Which, I mean, I guess does settle, because I mean, it shouldn't be, but when you have a female bad guy, it's always like, oh, we don't want the male hero to kill a female, even if she's a bad guy, usually. So in this case, she's not dead. Or she's about to die, I don't know. She's dying.
She's got to. Something's going to happen to her.
Yeah, I mean, she already fell. But yeah, so in this case, they just take each other out with their own dueling betrayals. He's crazy. He's got like a crazed look on his face.
You got that crazy look in your eye again.
Oh, you shouldn't have done that.
I got the crystal.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I can see why that's PG. It's a little intense.
Cuts him.
Crystallizing and still alive.
Watch out.
Maybe you just made him more powerful. Where were you guys during all that? I really could have used some help there. Well, you know, we were flying around. I do like how he doesn't even notice the dynamite's with. Oh shit. That's one universal truth. Civilizations that are close to volcanoes never do that well. Sooner or later, volcanoes erupt. I mean, they might all feel cozy and comfortable in Hawaii, but I wouldn't.
That's always in the back of my mind.
I mean, I guess now, like, there's ways to like predict it, right? Like, if I don't think a volcano can suddenly erupt out of nowhere and nobody saw it coming. I think they are able to study them so that they know certain signs before they erupt. But still,
I assume and hope, but I mean,
it doesn't make me feel.
We are humans.
Yeah.
Natural disasters happen all the time that we can't predict still. So
yeah. And I think a lot of people, historically, if you've looked into the history of like various eruptions like Mount Vesuvius and stuff like that, like a lot of people aren't aware that they can have worldwide consequences, that they alter the very climate of the planet. Like, maybe the most recent happened in I think 1816 or something like that. It all ties into if you're reading about the novel Frankenstein, why Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein in the first place. She was 19 years old. She was, with her fiance Shelley. I forget what Shelley it is, but she had him and they were a circle of writers and they were friends, and they kind of dared each other to write something scary. Which is where it came from. But what was their inspiration for that? Their inspiration for that was the year was later referred to as the year without summer, and it was because of a volcanic eruption in like Indo-fucking-nesia that literally like sent so much ash into the air and stuff that it
darkened the skies. Right?
It darkened the sky. It altered that, and like places all over Europe, crops failed. All sorts of stuff like that. So I'm always worried about the next one of those. Yeah, I've looked up to it before too. People say like, not counting pre-civilization, which you were talking about, hunter-gatherer society. Supposedly, like the worst time ever to be alive during human civilization is the 6th century. And there's like a span of like 10 years in there that involves several volcanic eruptions that altered the course of the world, several plagues, and like a few other things, all within the span of like 10 years, where just like a huge population of the earth just suffered and died. Like worse than during the Black Plague, which I think is the one most people think of. They think of the 1300s, the Black Death, the Black Plague, that really took out so much of Europe. But it was statistically speaking, and from a worldwide thing, in spreading out and affecting more areas. Oh yeah, there we go. There's the ancient robots. I'll give them credit. They don't look like they don't look like Miyazaki ancient robots. They look pretty different than the ones that you would see. A good shout out to the Miyazaki ancient robots from Castle in the Sky are in the episode, I think it's Heart of Steel, Batman, the animated series. The computer Hardak makes some. And you can and it's not even the anime that really originates. You can all the way go back. It stays in DC because you can go back to, there's a famous one of the Fleischer. Is it Fleischer? I always forget their name. The Fleischer Brothers Studios cartoons of the Superman from the 40s. There's one where he fights giant like atomic robots, and that's their thing. I've talked about that before too. It talks about many times about like how animation has sort of gone in cycles and things. And it's kind of crazy to think that like how sophisticated and amazing the animation of those cartoons is. This is the late 30s, early 40s. Then you compare them to say like a Super Friends episode from the 60s, and they look like shit by comparison, right? Because they're
cheaper,
cheaper, limited animation, and all that stuff. So I know people are probably sick of me talking about that kind of stuff, but it is always very amazing to me. And I hope the next, I have to say, the next one that we're not going to give it away. That's the one we won't give away. We gave away Transformers. The next one, we're going to do a sort of a classic character that's been in animation since pretty much the beginning. So that's a really big hint. And obviously that is going to lead some talk about the history of animation, particularly some of the earliest animation out there. But for a movie that itself is probably not very good, but opens up the door for all sorts of interesting stuff. So that's our next one whenever we get around to that. So
we'll have fun.
We'll keep that vague and mysterious for now.
Yes.
Although I gave some pretty big hints.
Some big hints, but I still think it's going to be a surprise for most.
Mm-hmm. I guess the day is saved. A lot of things blew up. The ancient robots did something. What exactly did those robots do? Crashes enough force to cause the volcano to reawaken. They bring the container back to the city. Milo opens the container. Kita and the heart of the Atlantis ascend. They awaken giant stone guardians, and create a force field to prevent lava from destroying the city. So there you go. That's what they did. I mean, they often film these things and record these things out of sequence, so I don't know. So I don't know if that's Jim Varney doing those lines or not. Because sometimes they do things out of order. Milo's gonna stay, isn't he? I would stay if I was Milo. I mean, so everything you've looked for, plus you've got this cool princess that seems to have the hots for you.
Yeah. And if you got nothing else going on for you back in the States.
Well, they just said there is a hero's welcome waiting for you. Hero's the man discovered. But he's not into that fortune and glory thing. I don't know much about the history of chiropractic. I wonder how good it was in 1914. A lot of people are skeptical of it now. I don't know. And look, they all made a lot of money off it, I guess. And their official story is they didn't find anything.
That guy. Little piece.
Helga, well, I don't know. She had food poisoning. I mean, I get what they're doing is just trying to preserve the secret, but if there's anybody else, it just sounds like maybe they murdered all these people. Like, he's missing, went down, I don't know. Best not to talk about it. Yeah, that guy's design even looks a lot like Professor Broom, the guy that discovers and raises Hellboy. As played by, I think, is it John Hurt in the movie? I don't know. Milo Thatch. He's very similar design, the squarish beard. Oh, we got a tattoo. We got some ink. I guess they don't specifically say if they're tattoos. I don't know. Maybe it comes right off. Yeah, we're coming up to the shot I talked about. It's like basically the last shot. But it's very sophisticated. It took a lot of work. This is known as the pull-out scene. Back at the time, they described it as the most difficult scene in the history of Disney animation. So that kind of hypes it up. A 16-inch piece of paper showing a close-up of Milo and Kida as the camera pulls away from them to reveal the newly restored Atlantis. It reaches the equivalent of an 18,000-inch piece of paper composed of many individual pieces of paper, 24 inches of smaller. Each piece was carefully drawn and combined with animated vehicles simultaneously flying across the scene to make the viewer see a complete integrated image. So yeah, it's easy to take things like this for granted, but there's a lot going on there and a lot of work put into a shot like that. And there you go, Atlantis the Lost Empire. So it's probably even better than I remember it, honestly. Like, I do, as we said, the story's not wholly original. We've talked about how there's lots of that happening in lots of other things, movies and video games and shows, and the characters again are not really. Oh, they still include Joss Whedon there in the credits for story, so something he contributed got there, although probably not much.
Well, and you got your producer Don Hahn, who's obviously a big Disney producer for a lot of the greats.
Sure. What has Kirk Wise been up to in the last few years?
I think quite a few things still, hasn't he?
I mean, there's been a lot of turnover at Disney in the last little while, as we all know. So I just don't know how it's affected some of the other departments. I don't know. I mean, I'm talking about like, the business side. And that was another thing that Jay and I covered when you're talking about the Black Cauldron was like, at the time, that was changing too. That was when, Eisner, was it Eisner? I don't know.
Eisner was in at that time, yeah.
Yeah. It was, somebody coming in and replacing somebody. It's easy for me to mix up those names. But anyway, that was one of the problems, or one of the things that was going on at the time of the Black Cauldron. So, yeah. Kirk Wise directed the English language translation of Spirited Away. So I'll like him for that, too. But let's see here. His first thing was he was an assistant animator on The Great Mouse Detective back in '86. He's done stuff. He doesn't seem like he's doing much lately. He was a creative consultant on the live-action 2017 Beauty and the Beast. But, I mean, this was really his last big project.
I guess so.
Because
I never heard of Bobbleheads, the movie. I'm looking at his list now. So
yeah, I'm just looking at, as far as Disney goes, after this, he did what I said. He was sort of the director of the English language of Spirited Away, which is, it's something, but still, that's just a completed movie, really. All you're doing is managing dialogue. Then there was something called Oceans, which is some sort of feature from Disney Nature. He's in Waking Sleeping Beauty, which, by the way, you should really watch. Anybody interested in animation, it's on Disney Plus. It's a 2009 documentary that talks a lot in great detail about things we talked, particularly about the years of the sort of decline leading into the Renaissance. So that's on Disney Plus for anyone that's interested. It's called Waking Sleeping Beauty, a really good documentary.
Okay.
And then he's just a creative consultant on the 2017 Beauty and the Beast and Chimpanzee. So that's all he's done for Disney in the last few years. Doesn't mean he's not doing anything. I'm just looking on the Disney Wiki. So this is only stuff he's done within Disney.
Do you see the 2012 Disney History Connections Colonial America?
No.
Well, I'm on Wikipedia, I guess, and that's one of his credits as director short. I bring that up because I worked on that, and I do not remember Kirk Wise.
Yeah, but I mean, he did tons of stuff leading up to that. I mean, animation, all sorts of stuff. Animation director of The Brave Little Toaster.
I knew I'd met Don Hahn, but and I might have met Kirk Wise and just didn't realize it.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, the big one is Beauty and the Beast. He was the director of the '91 Beauty and the Beast, not co-director, but director. And he was director of Hunchback of Notre Dame, and he was co-director of this one. So those are like his major contributions. But he'd been part of The Great Mouse Detective, Brave Little Toaster, Oliver and Company, Rescuers Down Under, Prince and the Pauper, which was a failure.
Yes.
Speaking of that, Mickey Mouse is another thing. Like, that's another new documentary that's on there that I haven't gotten around to yet. Like Mickey, the Story of a Mouse. That's newly added, which I want to see because Disney really was like coming into the '90s was really struggling. They did not know what the hell to do with Mickey, and they really wanted to reinvent him and keep him keep him relevant and all that. I mean, have you read any of the articles about that one they did in the mid-90s that they buried? The Mickey short?
I don't know.
Okay, hold on. I'm just going to name it for you.
What's the name of the short? Do you remember?
Yeah. I'll get it. Hold on a second.
Well, and those out there kind of listening, as I just said, I did work not for Disney directly, but for a production company for a couple of years, and we did a lot of Disney educational programs, that Colonial America, Disney History Connections, and the bigger one was Science of Disney Imagineering.
That's pretty awesome.
It was really cool, because we'd film in the parks. It kind of reminded me of the old when Disney would host and go to his parks and relate. But I mean, it was more educational. They were trying to relate science and education to the kids by using the Disney rides. And so I got to meet a lot of these people, and some of them not knowing what Kirk Wise looked like.
Yeah, I wouldn't know either. I know their names, but these are behind the scenes guys. You don't know what they look
exactly.
like. Really.
And so, and I remember the first
remembering
time
our friend Jim Barty.
Don Hahn's here, and I was like, oh, I know that name.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. But the short in question is called Runaway Brain, and it came out in 1995. I understand why they buried it, because it was very risque.
Wasn't it like almost Halloween type or a horror cartoon?
Yeah. He switches brains with a big monster, and there's like a monster version of Mickey, and the scientist that actually got it, who was voiced at the time by Frasier.
Kelsey Grammer.
He actually dies. He gets killed by like an explosion. Like, it's super dark, and they just didn't know what to do with it, and they buried it. But it did for a while in limited release. Like if you were one of the people that went to see A Kid in King Arthur's Court, like the first week it came out, you got to see it in the theater. And then they pulled it pretty fast. But yeah, there's a whole Wikipedia article on here too. But I'm sure if you look it up, you can find, this is what I read, about 2 years ago, somebody had done sort of an in-depth article on sort of the history of that short and what went into making it and how it's super interesting. So I would definitely recommend that to you and anybody else. And also, you can see some clips of it, and the animation is brilliant. It's great. So good.
I think I have seen or at least clips of it.
Yeah, it's so good. It's really good. But to this day, there's only one way to get it, and it's pretty much impossible. Remember when in the mid-2000s, they released sort of those silver edition DVDs of like various Disney shorts? There's a Mickey collection there that includes it. That's obviously long out of
collection. They had the Mickey, and those were quite the sets.
The name I couldn't think of, by the way, was Jeffrey Katzenberg. Katzenberg was newly coming into Disney around the time of Black Cauldron. Katzenberg also has his part to play in the story of Runaway Brain. But
he didn't last long. Walt Disney, was he in between Ron Miller and Eisenberg?
I mean, he was there from the late 80s through most of the 90s. I'm not sure exactly when he
CEO then. He was what?
I can't. Yeah, he changed a few times. Yeah. Walt Disney Treasures Mickey Mouse and Living Color Volume 2 came out in 2004. So you try to buy that now, it's a few $100. But that's the only media that it's on.
I'm pretty sure I've seen that, because I used to rent those in Burbank at our library, because they had the Donald set. They had several of those, and I thought they were amazing.
But yeah, if you just do like an ordinary Google search, you can probably come across the article. It's a really great article, really interesting to start talking about it. But Disney just buried it because they're kind of horrified by how dark it was. And that was the first Mickey short produced to like be shown in theaters for something since 1953. So it was a big deal. And then
Mickey's Christmas Carol, 1980.
Maybe. Did that get shown in theaters before movies?
I'm pretty sure it was.
Okay,
I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that was, because that was a big deal. He hadn't been seen for decades in theaters.
And as I've said on here before, and to Jess, like early on when I was a kid watching DuckTales, like I thought that canonically that was like Scrooge McDuck's first appearance. I thought he was created for that. Like I had no idea he'd existed for decades before that in the comics.
We did talk about that. Those little comic strip books, or
that was mostly Carl Barks, of course, is the one who created him. But lots of people would write and draw him. Carl Barks is the definitive one. But yeah, like for most of my childhood, like I thought that I knew him from '83, and I thought that was his first appearance. I thought they created him specifically for that because he was Scrooge McDuck. It was about Christmas Carol,
Yeah.
And since he was not in animated stuff before DuckTales, I just I didn't know much about the comics or anything about that. Yeah, so
I used to confuse him with Ludwig von Drake or whatever that.
Yeah, that's
when I was a little kid.
He's great too. He had some really good ones, including Donald in Math Magic Land.
Yes.
A few others from the 50s. Yeah, I always like Ludwig von Drake. They need to bring him back too. He's a favorite of mine. He did a really great one about music. I can't remember what it was called, but it was all just sort of about the science behind music and stuff. It was really interesting stuff. They were pretty good at their educational stuff back in the day.
They made it entertaining.
For sure. Anyway, we can leave it at that. Yeah, so revisiting this movie again, I think it holds up really well. It's interesting, since this is Disney Plus. I don't know if it came up for you, but Milo's Return is available on Disney Plus. So maybe I'll watch that out of curiosity just to see how it compares.
I think you're gonna.
You can already see.
If I'm guessing right, the animation is going to be completely different.
There's always a downgrade in the animation whenever they do the direct-to-video ones. But it seems worth checking out, I guess. So that's one of the interesting good things.
Did Michael J. Fox even do the voice of Milo in that one?
That is a good question.
He may have.
He may have. This was a little. He was still pretty active then. This is before he had to step away from acting.
Well, the voiceover work he's been able to do for quite a while still. I don't know about now, but
yeah, Katzenberg was CEO from '84 to '94. I thought it was a little further in the '90s. So actually, by the time Runaway Brain actually came out, he wasn't CEO anymore. But I know he was.
Well, Eisner was the president then, not the CEO.
Yeah. I get their.
I get all that confused.
I get their tenures mixed up.
Yep.
How they overlap and things like that. But yeah, and obviously he's one of the founders of DreamWorks with David Geffen and Steven Spielberg.
SKG.
He founded DreamWorks, which would of course go on to be big major competition for Disney. So it's just like Don Bluth all over again in a way, except Don Bluth was a super talent. I don't think Jeffrey Katzenberg was a talent. He was more of a business type guy.
He's a producer type, yeah.
Yeah. Not saying he couldn't do anything, but yeah, he wasn't like Don Bluth. But yeah, he had just joined Disney when they were doing Black Cauldron, and he was very involved in sort of the genesis of that, and a lot of the editing and cuts that they made. He was the one that was really upset by the disastrous test audience reaction and things like that. Yeah. But and DreamWorks is kind of a slow build because you look at like Prince of Egypt, Road to El Dorado. They're not really big hits. It's Shrek that really was the breakthrough and got them on the map.
Well, yeah. Well, those were still traditional animation. The first couple you mentioned, Road to El Dorado,
Prince of Egypt, yeah.
Prince of Egypt, yeah.
And we did talk a little about those movies from that era that were like going up against Disney when we did Anastasia, because Anastasia was sort of part of that wave. It was late 90s hand-drawn animation in sort of the Disney style, except it wasn't Disney. And now, like we said, it's kind of ironic that you can watch it on Disney Plus now, because now technically Disney owns the rights to it for some reason.
Because they own Fox, and if they were released by Fox,
there you go. Yeah.
Oh, Disney.
But anyway, yeah. So there's always great stuff to talk about for Disney. So this one, I'm sure we'll do other Disney movies in the future too. But we always try to do the sort of lesser known ones or ones off the beaten track. And like I said, a movie like this, I'm always interested to like discover or consider like exactly how it's remembered, like what people remember about it, what their impressions of it were. And as I said, revisiting it, I feel like it's a pretty strong movie actually. Yeah, the characters are kind of bland and not great, and maybe it went against the grain because Disney had been on such a roll of doing movies with music in them. Because even like something like the previous Tarzan. Tarzan was not a musical like the others. It didn't have the characters breaking down and doing musical numbers, but it still had a very important soundtrack, notably done by Phil Collins, where the music was a big part of the storytelling and the marketing and all this. And music is not really here. This is just about an adventure story. So it's not too hard to understand why the movie probably took some people off guard or wasn't what they were looking for, combined with something like Shrek being in theaters around the same time, and that seeming maybe more interesting or attractive to certain people. But I think it holds up pretty well. Really great animation. I mean, it's what you expect from Disney, but still, you can't just take it for granted. Interesting cast, even if the characters aren't great. Story's not wholly original, but it's stylistically is very good. I mean, I'm a big fan of Mike Mignola and Hellboy, and I really get a kick out of seeing his art style in a big budget type movie, because they've done a couple animated Hellboy movies and they're nice, but they're kind of small scale compared to something like this.
But I think you've said it all about this movie. I mean, it's definitely one, and I'll go back to it some years down the road. It may not be your Lion King or Beauty and the Beast or Little Mermaid or even many others, but it's a solid movie and deserves probably a little more respect than it gets.
Yeah. Coming up in the suggested there is one that I think that came after it was Treasure Island or Treasure Planet, which I think is 2002.
I always think of these two, Treasure Planet and this one, kind of.
And that's where I always think, like, should I out? And I'll tell you right now, I openly, really strongly have always disliked Treasure Planet, and I haven't seen it in ages, and I always think, should I give it another go? Because I mean, I really did not like it.
I don't recall liking it, even giving it a chance.
I didn't like its character. Unlike this movie, I did not like its look and feel. Like, I did not like the aesthetic. I did not
Doesn't
like the
it have
world
a similar,
because
they use CG for the ships and then
it's sort of a hybrid, a lot like this. It's like that, yeah. And it's doing that sort of thing too, where it's kind of like, it's set in the future, so it's sci-fi, but it has sort of like an old school aesthetic to remind you of like classic pirate stuff. It didn't work for me. I didn't like it. I can't even remember really. I think the same year Treasure Planet came out. Isn't that the same year that the Bluth Space one came out?
Bluth Space one. Which one was that? Now, see, I'm blanking on that.
Yeah, hold on. That might be one we could do, honestly. Titan AE.
Oh,
Titan AE was actually 2000, so it predated by a couple years. So yeah, so that was 2 years after Titan AE, but I remember really liking Titan AE and really disliking Treasure Planet. But yeah, Titan AE might be one we do at some point, because I remember being quite impressed by that movie at the time.
Honestly, I remember it, but I don't remember if I actually watched it.
I think it's pretty good. Matt Damon's the main guy. Nathan Lane's in there for some comedy. But it's like sort of like a big space epic type thing, spaceships and everything like that. It did not perform well at the box office. It was a box office flop, but I think it was pretty good. So unfortunately, I don't think Titan AE is on Disney Plus though. I'll take a look here just to.
I don't remember which studio he released that with.
I've got it up here. This should tell me.
But of course, there's always a chance because obviously we're planning on continuing this on.
Oh, this is Fox too.
A lot of fun. So is it Fox? It could be.
This is Fox, so it should be on there. So yeah, that might be a good one to do, especially if you didn't see it. Because while I have seen it and I remember liking it, I haven't seen it in so long. Yeah, it's on Disney Plus.
I'll be.
So yeah, that's a good possibility going forward. So as anybody watching now or later can find out, we do have some things planned vaguely for the future as we go forward in our animation series, some things that we'll share and some things that we'll keep a secret for now. So that's awesome. So anyway, thanks a lot to anybody that tuned in tonight to check this one out. And we'll try to give a little bit better notice for the next one coming out. Just as we said, every once in a while you're trying to coordinate and I don't know, something comes up or something happens and you get delayed and all that shit, whatever. Anyway, thank you very much for being with us. Thanks a lot, guys. And we'll see you pretty soon with something new. Until then, peace out. Have a good one. Bye-bye.